just want to mention this. There is the issue about apostles and tongues, and there are people who might ask the question, well, wait a minute, Pastor, we don't practice speaking in tongues, but here it says that they're speaking in tongues. Why is it that our particular church doesn't speak in tongues, but if I go, a mile up the road, I'll sit in a church that does speak in tongues? Well, it's very simple. It may not seem simple to some folks. It seems very simple to me. Maybe it's because I'm simple-minded, and at times, and things like this are very easy for me. Number one, if you understand what a gift is for, then you understand when it's appropriate. The gift of tongues was given to the early church for the purpose of showing that God's ministry to the Hebrews was now expanding to people of every tribe, tongue, and nation. We do understand that the Old Testament was written specifically to the Hebrews, yet at Pentecost, people from every tongue heard the gospel in their own language. That's the initial speaking of tongues, right? Once the gospel had gone from Judea to Samaria and to the ends of the earth, which it did in the book of Acts, and you follow it through, and every time there was a movement from Judea to Samaria and then into the world, there was a Pentecost moment where this thing happened, this miracle happened. After that event and the gospel had gone out, the purpose of the tongues was removed. There was no longer a need for that gift, to the point that by the time of Justin Martyr, who was an early church father, he was asked about the gift of tongues, and he says, we do not know what this even means because it is no longer operational. Fast forward to the year I believe it was 1906. I could be wrong about that, but the Azusa Street Mission in California began the modern-day Pentecostal movement with the speaking in tongues. So for 1900 years, nobody even knew what it meant. And now it is done in such a way that it is done in repetition, and as vain repetition at that. It is done as gibberish, and it is not what I believe the original intent of the Scripture is. Glossalia means a language. That is the Greek word for tongue here, glossa and glossalia. And never is this seen as just simply spouting out gibberish. Furthermore, Jesus said, when you pray, do not pray as the heathens do, who pray in vain repetition. The Greek word for vain repetition is bata lageo, and it literally means to go bata, 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 bata. He said, don't do that, because that's praying like the heathen. Now, I'm not trying to be ugly. I'm just telling you these are things the Scripture says. It also says if you're going to speak in tongues, don't do it more than 2 or 3 at a time and not without an interpreter. I've been in churches where they just wildly do it with no interpreter. Men and women do it. It says women keep quiet in the church not to speak in tongues. That specific verse where it says women are not to speak in church is specifically in reference to speaking in tongues. It's in 1 Corinthians 14. Have I gone far enough? I think I'm going to move on. I could keep going. But let me add a thought before I go further. Though I would disagree and I would not join a church that allowed such practice, I do think they're in error. I don't think they're unsaved. I think they're confused. So please let me just throw that as I'm not damning anyone for being wrong, because I have the capacity to be wrong on this issue. I'm just giving you simply how to understand why there are certain gifts, there are certain miracles that were for a time and were not intended to continue. How many of you ever saw a burning bush? Nobody. How many of you ever saw a Red Sea part? Any sea, St. John's River. You ever seen it part? No, because that miracle was for a time, and after it was accomplished its purpose, it didn't happen again. Likewise with certain miracles in the New Testament. However, we'll